Welcome to the Eric Brady podcast, Series 1, Adolf Hitler, His Bombers and Me. Episode 21, ACC and KCC. Eric, what happened to you when you were pulled out from under the rubble?
Because the rescuers realised immediately that my ankle was smashed, I also had this arm injury. I was put on a stretcher, would have been taken to St Andrew's Church Hall for initial assessment. My hand was probably stuffed inside my overcoat, which I'd been wearing in the dining area, and then just taken off to the quick assessment and treatment at Lewisham Hospital. My first memory was being in Lewisham Hospital and getting these electrical tests, because it was also there that my mother told me about Kitty. Which came first, I just don't remember.
There is a picture from the Paramount newsreel from just after the bombing of you in Lewisham Hospital. I guess that's where the treatment began.
I think it was there that they conducted the initial tests on my arm. My ankle was fairly soon dealt with, inasmuch the bones were reset as far as could be done, and the hole was encased in plaster of Paris cast from just under my knee right down to my toes. That was, of course, to hold the bones in place. For my left arm, they knew that it was paralysed, and they wanted to find out the extent of the paralysis. And so what they did was to use electrodes. And I well remember being taken down to the radiology department, it must have been, and there was a big machine, a nurse and a doctor, and first of all, he tried what they called the pin test. And that was that he'd stick a pin in various parts of my arm, and I had my eyes closed, and he wanted me to tell him, now, was that the point? Was that the head? And waited for my response. Sometimes I could tell it quite easily, particularly on the underside of my upper arm. And that was very sensitive indeed. And so was the palm of my hand. And other places, I might say, well, that's the head. And then there'd be a silence because I didn't feel anything whatsoever. Then he'd stick the pin in a different place. Following that, which wasn't too painful really, they decided to move to the electrical machines. There, the nurse was watching the machine and the recordings on that, whatever they were, and the doctor placed the electrodes at different points of my arm. There were two electrodes. One would be placed at the top at my shoulder and the other elsewhere on my arm. And then the nurse would be told where to calibrate the dial on the machine. And they would try with a very low shock, first of all, and see which of my fingers or wrist twitched. If it didn't work on the first bit, they tried to raise the ampage or whatever it was, the current, and give it a boost and see what the response was then. And they will keep on doing that, raising it higher and higher. Some of the time I didn't feel a thing. Other times, with the underside of my upper left arm, it really, really hurt. And the big thing that I do remember was that the nurse would call out a figure, ACC, KCC, and this kept on, so it really got fixed in my mind. Very many years later, I had a similar test. The machine was very small now, same electrodes though, and the doctor tried it and various parts, and it wasn't quite so painful under my arm by this stage, and other times nothing twitched at all. And so I asked this specialist, what ACC, KCC meant. And he said, "Oh, you must have got it wrong. I've been doing this for 20 years and never heard of it." I said, "Oh, I'm talking, let me say, 70 years ago." And I suddenly realised I must be getting old.
I found that ACC stands for anodal closure contraction, where they probed using the positive electrode, and that was thought to have a sedation effect. And KCC stands for cathodal closure contraction, where the probe was the negative electrode, and that was thought to have a stimulation effect. This was from the Encyclopaedia Britannica 1911 though, so how long they continued to use those terms, I don't know. So after these tests, what happened next?
I was fairly soon transferred from Lewisham Hospital up to Farnborough Hospital. This was Farnborough, Kent, and that was a small town just on the outskirts of Bromley. There I had a bit more treatment, I suppose, and they were waiting to see how my ankle would respond. Had to leave time for that to knit. It was there, I think, that I had my left arm permanently raised in a sling with the structure consisted of a high piece of wood stretching up at the foot of my bed and one at the head of the bed and a crossbeam, and the sling was suspended from that, and so I was held at waist level. My arm was held at slightly above shoulder level. What they thought that would do, I've no idea. And so I was there for quite a time. Then one day the doctors just took that away and I was in the ordinary bed. And the doctor came with what I now would refer to as bolt cutters to cut the plaster off my leg. I don't know if they weren't particularly sharp or the plaster of Paris was particularly thick, but I do remember he had a terrible job. At one point, I was taken in, still lying in the bed, up to the flat roof of the hospital. I was told I was there for some, quote, fresh air. And only went there once, so why they chose that particular time, I've no idea. But surrounding the flat roof, which was very large, was a 3-foot high parapet. And I made up my mind that as soon as I could, I'd get out of bed and go and see what was on the other side of the parapet. However, I was being still in the bed. The plaster of Paris had been cut off, and then I was put in a wheelchair, taken out to a lift, but instead of going up to the flat roof for me to get to look at what was over the parapet, the lift went down. I was put in an ambulance and just taken off. I was never told the reason why, but I suppose boys never were in those days. And I was taken to Chase Farm Hospital, which was at Enfield, Middlesex. And there I was put into a ward of wounded soldiers. And I felt that I was really privileged to be among those wounded warriors. Obviously, all of them were brave, all must be medal winners, and I was actually living with them, and I thought that was terrific.
To buy your copy of Adolf Hitler, His Bombers and Me to read alongside the series, go to ericbradybooks.co.uk. The Eric Brady podcast can be found on YouTube, podcast services, and at ericbrady.blogspot.com.